The rain fell in slow, persistent sheets the morning of my mother's funeral, each drop striking the black asphalt like a muted drumbeat. I stood beneath the overhang of the small chapel in Harrington, Ohio, staring at the procession of black cars lined up along the narrow street. My heart thudded, a dull, heavy rhythm, as if it understood that grief alone could not account for the weight pressing down on me. Inside, the chapel smelled of polished wood and lilies, the air thick with the murmurs of acquaintances and relatives I barely knew. My mother, Clara Reed, lay in the casket at the front, her hands folded neatly over her chest, her face serene in death. I wanted to believe she was at peace, but I could still see the flicker of fear she carried in her eyes in her final days, a fear I now understood had never left her. The ceremony passed in a blur. The muted prayers, the eulogies that spoke of kindness and generosity, the polite handshakes and whispered condolences. Yet beneath the veneer of mourning, there was tension, almost tangible, like a current running through the room. I felt the eyes of certain relatives on me, eyes that weighed, that judged, that calculated. And then she appeared, Mrs. Evelyn Hartley, my mother's sister, an elegant figure draped in deep emerald silk, her hair perfectly styled, her expression unreadable. She carried an air of authority that seemed almost unnatural, a presence that made the room bend around her. I had barely known her growing up, her visits rare, her attention always measured, but the whispers among the family made it clear she was no ordinary relative. When her eyes met mine across the chapel, a flicker of something unspoken passed between us, something heavy and significant. After the service, we gathered in the small hall beside the chapel, the scent of coffee and pastries filling the uneasy silence. Mrs. Hartley approached me, her steps deliberate, her hands clasped in front of her. "Isabel," she said, her voice low, controlled, yet threaded with a softness I did not expect. "Your mother, she spoke often of you in her last months. She was proud. But you know, some things she could not say aloud, some things she feared would never be understood." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Her eyes studied me, searching, as if weighing whether I was ready. Then she reached into the folds of her coat and handed me a small envelope, unsealed, thick with documents. "This is yours now," she said simply. "Everything your mother left, I have seen it carried to you. But take care, Isabel. There are stories in that inheritance that not all are pleasant. Some truths are difficult to bear." I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands, heavier than the papers it contained. Unease coiled in my stomach, a quiet, gnawing warning I couldn't ignore. I glanced back at the casket, at the woman who had been my mother, and I wondered what secrets had followed her into the grave. Mrs. Hartley's presence, her quiet words, left a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Whatever lay ahead, I knew this wake was only the beginning, and deep down, I sensed the life I had known was about to shatter in ways I could not yet imagine. Even as a child, I knew the walls of our house in Harrington, Ohio had secrets. The Victorian structure loomed over me, its high ceilings and narrow hallways a maze I navigated with caution, as if at any turn I might stumble upon something forbidden. My parents, Clara and Thomas Reed, were often distant, their love uneven, a patchwork of brief attentions and long silences. Most nights it was my grandfather, Walter Reed, who ruled the house. His presence was like a storm trapped inside a man, cold, calculating, with a gaze that could make the bravest adult shrink back. I learned quickly that obedience was survival. Speak too loudly, smile at the wrong moment, linger too long in a room. Any small mistake earned a glance that cut deeper than any words. School offered little escape. I was a quiet child, easily overlooked, my classmates curious about the timid girl who always lingered at the edges. Teachers noticed my manners but never my fear. My friends were few, and those I trusted, I soon learned, could not keep secrets the way the walls of our house could. I became my own confidant, storing whispers in the corners of my mind where no one could reach them. It started subtly. A touch that lingered too long. A command that seemed harmless but carried a weight I could not name. I learned that silence was safety. I learned that questions invited punishment. My mother seemed unaware, or perhaps too afraid to see, while my father's absences were long enough to escape scrutiny, but short enough that he never truly intervened. The house itself became a teacher. I memorized every creak in the floorboards, every draft that whispered through the attic. I learned to move quietly, to occupy spaces that offered shelter. My grandfather's study, lined with dark mahogany and leather-bound books, became both a prison and a map of control. I saw the glint of power in his eyes when he spoke of the family name, the importance of reputation, the necessity of secrecy. Even as a child, I understood that the stories people told about our family were only fragments. The truth lived in fear and manipulation. Friendship and affection were scarce commodities. I learned to distrust easily, to measure every word, every glance. The shadows in the hallways mirrored the shadows in the family, looming, unpredictable, threatening. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake listening to muffled arguments, the occasional slam of a door, and sometimes my mother's stifled cries. I never fully understood what happened behind closed doors, but I felt its imprint. It lingered on my skin, in my chest, in the small, silent girl who would later become determined not to be broken. Yet, even amid this darkness, a spark of defiance lived in me. A silent promise whispered to myself in the quiet corners of my room. One day I would understand. One day I would see the truth. One day I would rise above the shadows that haunted Harrington. And so the first seeds of distrust, of vigilance and of survival were sown, seeds that would grow into the sharp, deliberate resolve that would define the rest of my life. The first time I arrived at St. Mary's Academy in Lancaster, Ohio, I felt both relief and unease. Relief that the distance from Harrington might shield me from the constant scrutiny of my grandfather, and unease at the austere stone building that seemed to watch me as I crossed the threshold. Its tall windows reflected the late afternoon sun like dark eyes, and the iron gates clicked shut behind the car with a finality that made my stomach twist. The nuns welcomed me with polite smiles, though their eyes carried the weight of authority and expectation. Among them, Sister Margaret stood out, a tall, stern woman with sharp features softened only by the warmth she reserved for those she deemed ready to earn it. She showed me to my dormitory, a room sparse but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a window that overlooked the academy's sprawling courtyard. It was in those first weeks that I began to notice the rules of St. Mary's were not only strict. They were a test of obedience, endurance, and silence. Minor mistakes, like whispering too long or failing to polish shoes properly, drew cold glances or whispered reprimands. Yet beneath the rigid discipline, I sensed something darker, a subtle fear, a quiet submission among the girls that went beyond the usual boarding school strictness. Sister Margaret took notice of me. She often lingered by my side during lessons, offering quiet guidance, a hand on my shoulder, a word of reassurance when the other girls whispered about their homes. Slowly, she began to share fragments of what lay hidden in Lancaster. Girls who arrived from seemingly ordinary families like me sometimes carried shadows that were never spoken of aloud. Rumors circulated of influential men, secret gatherings, and a circle of power that extended its reach far beyond the town. I didn't understand it fully at first, but a chill ran down my spine the first time Sister Margaret mentioned the brotherhood, as she called it. She never named names, only hinted that certain families in Lancaster wielded power through fear and manipulation, that the town's elite protected themselves and punished those who dared speak the truth. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, testing, almost pleading. I felt the weight of a secret I was not yet ready to carry, but the seed of understanding was planted. Late at night, when the dormitory was quiet, I would lie awake, listening to the rustle of skirts and the distant sound of whispered prayers. The other girls seemed oblivious or resigned, but I could feel the tension, the hidden anxieties, and the unspoken rules that governed their lives. I realized survival here required more than obedience. It required vigilance, intuition, and the courage to recognize danger before it arrived. Sister Margaret became my anchor. Her presence reminded me that not everyone was complicit, that there were those who could be trusted, who could guide me through the perilous maze of secrets and fear. Yet, even as I felt a glimmer of safety, I knew I was only scratching the surface. The shadows of my family's past had followed me here, and the truth waiting at St. Mary's was far darker than I could have imagined. By the end of my first month, I understood one thing clearly. The world I had escaped from in Harrington had not vanished. It had merely shifted its form. And I would have to be clever, careful, and relentless if I wanted to survive the silent horrors of Lancaster. One rainy evening, I found myself pacing the narrow corridor of St. Mary's Academy, the sound of water tapping against the windows mirroring the storm of thoughts inside me. I had spent weeks observing, listening, piecing together whispered rumors and strange incidents among the town's elite. The more I learned, the heavier the weight on my chest became. Finally, I could no longer keep it to myself. I approached Sister Margaret in the dimly lit study, where the smell of old books mingled with the faint scent of incense. She looked up from her notes, her calm eyes noticing immediately the tremor in my voice. "Sister, I need to tell you something," I said, almost in a whisper. I recounted everything. The abuse I endured at home, my grandfather's manipulations, the way the brotherhood seemed to control the town through fear and secrecy. For a long moment, she remained silent. Then she reached out, placing a gentle hand over mine. "Isabel, I have seen this before," she said softly. "Not all of Lancaster is as it seems. Powerful men hide behind their influence, and few dare to challenge them. But there are ways to expose them, to hold them accountable without putting yourself directly in their path." Her words ignited something I hadn't felt in years: hope. "But how?" I asked, my voice trembling. She leaned closer, her tone measured, almost conspiratorial. "I have connections, Isabel. People in positions of law, of influence, who quietly ensure that justice can be pursued. Not through public scandal or violence, but through truth that cannot be ignored. You must understand, the moment we speak openly, the danger is immense. The brotherhood protects itself ruthlessly." I swallowed hard, feeling both fear and determination mingle in my chest. "I don't want revenge," I said firmly. "I want justice. I want them to face the consequences of what they've done. For all the girls they've hurt. For my family." Sister Margaret studied me for a long time, her eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. "Justice, real justice, will not be easy. You will face moral dilemmas, moments when taking the right path feels impossible. But you are stronger than you know. You have survived horrors that would break most people. You have a mind that can outthink those who rely on fear." I nodded, feeling a resolve building inside me. "Then I'm ready," I whispered. "I want to learn. I want to do what's necessary, the right way." She smiled faintly, a rare softness in her stern expression. "We will plan carefully, each step measured, every move deliberate. The brotherhood underestimates you because they cannot imagine that one girl, guided by truth and courage, can dismantle their power. You will be patient, Isabel, and relentless. And above all, you will protect yourself while ensuring justice is served." That night, as I lay in my dormitory, the rain still drumming against the windows, I felt the first spark of purpose in years. The girl who had arrived in Lancaster afraid and powerless was no longer the same. The road ahead would be treacherous, filled with fear and uncertainty. But for the first time, I understood that I had allies, and that the shadows that haunted me could be confronted, not with vengeance, but with justice, careful planning, and unwavering strength. By the time dawn broke over the academy, I had made a silent vow to myself. I would not let the Brotherhood's secrets continue to destroy lives. I would face them, strategically, intelligently, and ultimately, I would ensure that justice, not fear, prevailed. By the time I turned 18, I had mastered the art of concealment. Outwardly, I was the perfect student, polite, attentive, excelling in every subject. Inside, I was sharpening skills that would serve a far greater purpose. When I received my acceptance to Cleveland University Law School, it felt like a ticket to freedom and to justice. The campus was alive with energy, students rushing between lectures, debates spilling from classrooms into the hallways. I immersed myself in every legal principle, every precedent, every case that spoke to justice and accountability. Each law book I devoured became another weapon, each lecture another piece of armor. I was determined to transform the pain of my past into something formidable, precise, and unassailable. It was during these years that I reconnected with my father, who had moved to Cleveland after years of struggling with his own demons. Our bond grew slowly, cautiously, built on tentative trust. He became my anchor, grounding me when memories of Harrington and the shadows of the Brotherhood threatened to pull me under. I never shared the full story, not yet. Some battles had to be fought alone, strategically, without risking the lives of those I loved. Through Sister Margaret, I gained access to her brother, District Attorney Jonathan Whitaker, a man respected in legal circles for his discretion and relentless pursuit of truth. He never knew every detail, but he understood the weight of secrecy, of power abused behind closed doors. Quietly, he provided access to archives, old investigation files, and rumor networks that were invisible to most. Each connection was another thread in the web I was beginning to weave. I also cultivated relationships with classmates, professors and local attorneys, contacts I could trust, people who were intelligent, ethical, and resourceful. Some were unaware of my intentions. Others became silent allies, supporting me in ways that were subtle yet powerful. Every conversation, every discussion in class, every internship I undertook at prestigious firms was part of the plan. Information, resources, influence, they were all tools. By the end of my first year, I had begun to map the Brotherhood's reach, who they favored, who they intimidated, who could be swayed, and who could be exposed. I cataloged weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and potential leverage points. Each piece of information brought clarity and a sense of control that I had never felt as a child. It was empowering, yet the responsibility weighed heavily. This was not about revenge, it was about justice. Every move had to be careful, deliberate. One misstep could undo everything, alert the Brotherhood, and put countless lives at risk. I reminded myself constantly, patience, precision, and prudence. Late nights at the library, long walks through Cleveland's quiet streets, discussions over coffee with mentors and allies, all became part of a rhythm that centered me. I was no longer a girl running from shadows. I was a woman preparing for a calculated confrontation with the men who had cast long, dark shadows over my life. Each day I became stronger, smarter, and more determined. By the time graduation approached, I was ready, not just with a law degree, but with a network, a strategy, and the unwavering resolve to confront the Brotherhood on my own terms. I was no longer the frightened girl from Harrington. I was Isabel Reed, armed with knowledge, allies, and a plan that could finally bring the justice that had eluded my family for decades. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in Cleveland when I first saw him again. My father, Richard Reed, standing outside a small cafe on the corner of Monroe and 7th. He looked older, thinner, the lines on his face etched deeper than I remembered. but there was something different in his eyes. Clarity, steadiness, a light that had been absent for years. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. Then almost instinctively he spotted me. His eyes widened, mouth slightly agape. "Isabel?" he whispered, as if afraid the world itself might deny him this moment. I walked toward him slowly, cautious, yet overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. "Dad," I said, barely above a breath. We embraced on the sidewalk, two strangers bound by blood and shared pain. Tears came freely, not just mine but his as well. For years we had been strangers to each other, separated not just by distance, but by the shadows of the past. He held me as if trying to anchor himself to something real, something he had lost for too long. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again," he murmured. His voice shook, carrying the weight of years spent in regret. "I've been sober for 3 years. I've been trying to put the pieces together." I pulled back slightly, studying him. The man before me was not the father who had faltered, who had stumbled under the weight of addiction and grief. This man had fought for a second chance at life, and somehow, in doing so, had preserved a piece of himself that I could recognize. He told me about the years after Harrington, how he had left the sawmill, moved to Cleveland, joined a support group, and started to rebuild a modest life. He spoke carefully, pausing often, as though every word carried a confession. "Your grandfather," he lied to me, "told me you were safe in New York, that you didn't want to see me. But I always knew there was more. I just didn't know how to reach you." I squeezed his hands, feeling a mixture of sorrow and relief. "Dad, I've been here in Cleveland the whole time. I wanted to protect you from knowing the full truth. Some battles had to be fought alone." We spent hours that day wandering the streets, talking quietly about life, about regrets, about survival. Slowly, our bond began to heal, tempered by honesty and tempered by care. Each story, each shared memory, chipped away at the years of distance and fear. In the following months, our relationship grew steadily. Sunday visits became routine. He attended my law lectures occasionally, sharing in my academic victories, celebrating quietly whenever I gained recognition. I never shared the details of my full plan against the brotherhood. He didn't need the burden of that knowledge, but he sensed the resolve and strength I carried, and he admired it quietly. For the first time in decades, I felt a sense of family, not perfect, not unscarred, but real. My father was no longer a stranger, and I was no longer a child grasping for security. We had both survived, both transformed by the past, and now, together, we were reclaiming the fragments of what had once been lost. By the time I was ready to act, I had spent years building the perfect network. Contacts at law firms, journalists and public offices, all quietly aligned, ready to respond without ever revealing my hand. The first target would be Dr. Harold Morgan, the town physician and a pillar of Harrington's elite. Dr. Morgan had long cultivated an image of respectability, a man above reproach. Yet beneath the surface, he had facilitated countless secrets for the brotherhood, illegal procedures, falsified medical records, and the protection of their darkest deeds. My mentor, Sister Margaret, had provided access to hints and whispers, enough to begin crafting my plan. I spent weeks assembling the evidence, carefully falsifying documents that implicated Morgan in activities he could not easily deny. Each forged report was precise, professional, plausible, but enough to trigger suspicion. Anonymous letters were sent to the federal authorities and select journalists, each tip carefully worded to plant doubt and urgency. Then came the day the domino fell. The federal investigators arrived quietly, without fanfare, and began reviewing Dr. Morgan's files. Inside Harrington, whispers spread rapidly. Neighbors who had long respected the doctor began noticing the subtle signs. abrupt changes in his schedule, nervous interactions with patients, and hurried phone calls. Morgan's wife, previously unaware of the full extent of his dealings, found the letters and documents that arrived at their home. Shock turned to outrage, and she filed for divorce immediately. Rumors and small conversations that once went unnoticed now snowballed into a scandal. Even without concrete proof, the mere suggestion of wrongdoing was enough to erode his carefully constructed reputation. I watched from a distance as Harrington began to stir. The town that had always looked the other way, that had normalized the brotherhood's influence, now felt the first tremors of fear. People whispered in shops, at church, even outside the mayor's office. My first strike was not violent, not public, but it was precise, calculated, and devastating. Sister Margaret contacted me that evening, her voice steady, yet tinged with awe. "The first piece has fallen," she said, "and the others will notice. Fear is contagious, Isabel. Use it wisely." I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, but I did not celebrate. There was a long road ahead, and this was only the beginning. Each step had to be measured, each action precise. One misstep could undo everything, or worse, expose me. That night, I returned to my apartment, reviewing the evidence once more, cross-checking every document, every letter, every detail. I knew the Brotherhood members would begin looking over their shoulders. Paranoia was a weapon as effective as law or money, and I intended to wield it with precision. Dr. Morgan's fall set the precedent. Even the untouchable were vulnerable. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a cold certainty. One by one, the pillars of Harrington would crumble. And when they did, the town would never look the same again. After the first strike, the momentum was on my side. Dr. Morgan's disgrace had shaken Harrington's elite, and the ripple of fear spread faster than I could have anticipated. One by one, the pillars of the Brotherhood were vulnerable, and I was ready to topple them methodically. The next target was Sheriff Benjamin Lawson. Through Sister Margaret's brother, D.A. Jonathan Whitaker, I accessed whispers of his long-standing bribery schemes, hidden behind a veil of public service. Anonymous letters, carefully phrased and meticulously timed, brought investigators to his doorstep. The sheriff, once feared and untouchable, found himself under scrutiny, his influence eroding as evidence of corruption surfaced. Public trust crumbled overnight, and whispers turned into murmurs of outrage across Harrington. Banker Samuel Elliott was next. Using the discreet attention of a central banking auditor and subtle hints of embezzlement and money laundering, I orchestrated a quiet financial investigation. Documents that highlighted his misuse of funds were sent anonymously to regulatory authorities. The news spread through the town like wildfire. Elliott, a man who had long held power over the livelihoods of families, was arrested quietly, his empire destabilized without a single public confrontation. Mayor Richard Clark required a different approach. His affair with a longtime secretary had been an open secret among the town's gossiping elite, but I had the evidence to make it undeniable. Anonymous letters, compromising photos, and carefully sourced accusations were sent to his wife and the local press simultaneously. Coupled with concurrent allegations of misuse of municipal funds, the mayor's political career imploded within days. Clark's influence was broken, leaving the town's citizens in stunned disbelief. Landowner Gideon Harper, who had long oppressed small farmers through questionable property claims, fell next. Archival research uncovered legal irregularities and evidence of illegal land acquisition. Families he had wronged received the documents anonymously, sparking a wave of legal claims. Supported by my colleagues and Sister Margaret's network, Harper lost a substantial portion of his holdings, the legal system quietly balancing decades of injustice. Even Pastor Elias Warren, once considered untouchable due to his religious position, was not immune. Victims of his abuse, emboldened by the exposure of the Brotherhood's other members, came forward under protection. The church hierarchy intervened discreetly, transferring him to a remote monastery where he could do no further harm. Each takedown was precise, leaving no trail back to me. The town's elite were crumbling, their power dismantled one calculated move at a time. Harrington itself seemed to hold its breath as the once untouchable figures disappeared into scandal, arrest, or exile. By the end of the 5-year campaign, the Brotherhood lay in ruins. The men who had wielded power through fear and manipulation were stripped of influence, their reputations shattered. The town of Harrington, unaware of the full orchestration behind these events, simply sensed that a new era had begun. And through it all, I remained in the shadows, the architect of justice, watching patiently as each domino fell. Suspense and tension were my allies, patience my weapon. Justice had been served, not with violence, but with precision, strategy, and a long, steady hand. The call came quietly one afternoon. My grandfather, Edward Reed, had suffered a stroke. The news stirred no panic in me, only a quiet inevitability. I had prepared for this moment in countless ways, yet nothing could steel me for the gravity of seeing him weakened, diminished, human. 2 days later, I entered the hospital room in Harrington. Machines hummed softly, tubes and monitors tracing the fragile rhythm of his life. Edward Reed looked nothing like the formidable man who had ruled over my childhood with iron control. His eyes, once sharp and unyielding, now flickered with confusion and recognition. "You came to see me die?" he rasped, voice weak but tinged with the arrogance I remembered. "I came to say goodbye," I replied evenly, taking the chair beside his bed. There was no tremor in my hands, no hesitation in my voice. The years of planning, the careful orchestration of justice, had tempered me into someone resolute, someone no longer defined by fear. His gaze studied me, measuring, searching. Then recognition settled. "It was you," he whispered, a shadow of awe and dread in his voice. "All this, it was you," I nodded, meeting his gaze steadily. "Yes, Grandpa. Every step, every domino. You built a world where pain thrived. I dismantled it, piece by piece." A tear slid down his weathered cheek, a silent acknowledgement of regret, fear, and the weight of years squandered in control. "Why didn't you just move on?" he managed, voice fragile yet searching. "Because you were the disease," I said softly, letting the words settle. "The disease that destroyed my mother, that tried to destroy me, that corrupted Harrington. Someone had to remove it." For a long moment silence hung between us, heavy and charged. I saw flashes of the man he once was, the power he wielded, and the fear he inspired. And yet here he was, vulnerable, diminished, mortal. Justice had arrived quietly, without spectacle, without noise, and it had reached him. "You are stronger than all of us," he said finally, voice faint but clear. "Stronger than your mother. Stronger than I ever imagined." I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Strength was not measured in triumph over him, but in the life I had rebuilt, the people I had protected, the wrongs I had quietly righted. My victory was not in his suffering. It was in reclaiming my life, in ensuring that the legacy of fear he had fostered could no longer continue. I stood, adjusted my coat, and looked down at him one last time. "Goodbye, Grandpa." He reached out weakly, almost imperceptibly. "You won, Isabel," he murmured. "The Brotherhood? It's over," I smiled, a quiet, controlled smile. "No, Grandpa. I didn't win. I did justice." That night, Edward Reed passed quietly in his sleep. No fanfare, no spectacle. Only the closing of a chapter that had spanned decades of fear and manipulation. I left the hospital knowing that Harrington had changed forever, not because of revenge, but because someone had finally acted with purpose. patience, and unyielding resolve. Justice had come, measured and precise. And I, Isabel Reed, had risen not only from the shadows of my past, but above them, carrying forward a legacy of strength, resilience, and truth. The sun rose over Pacific Haven, casting golden light across the waves that stretched endlessly to the horizon. It was a quiet morning, but to me, Isabel Reed, every sunrise now felt like a gift I had fought to earn. After years of planning, strategy, and careful dismantling of the brotherhood that had poisoned Harrington, it was time to live, not just survive, not just seek justice, but truly live. I purchased a modest house overlooking the sea. Small, sturdy, with a porch that welcomed morning coffee and evening reflection. The ocean's rhythm reminded me daily that life moves forward, unrelenting yet beautiful. Here I chose peace but also purpose. I opened my home to women and children who had endured what I had. Trauma, abuse, neglect. Each day I listened, advised, and guided, turning my personal experience into a lifeline for those who had none. It was in a seminar on social justice at Pacific Haven University that I met Gabriel Morton, a history professor with a quiet kindness in his eyes and infinite patience. Unlike others who recoiled or pitied me, Gabriel listened. He understood that my scars were not weaknesses, but stories of survival. Over time, our friendship blossomed into love, a gentle, grounding force in a life that had known too much upheaval. In 1980, we welcomed Lila, a 5-year-old girl rescued from a harrowing home life. She arrived silent, frightened, hesitant to trust. But the spark I had once seen in my own reflection as a child, the spark of resilience, was alive in her. Day by day we rebuilt her world. Quilts I sewed with remnants of Gabriel's old shirts, colorful scraps, became her comfort. Each stitch a reminder that she mattered, that her story could be rewritten. Gabriel and I worked in tandem. He nurtured her love of learning. I nurtured her sense of safety. Slowly, laughter returned to our home. Lila's first tentative smiles became full grins. Her timid steps became confident strides. The house, once quiet, now echoed with life, voices, and hope. I continued my legal work, though not in grand courtrooms or high-profile cases. I worked quietly, efficiently, protecting women and children from abuse, offering counsel to those who felt powerless. Each victory, each child or woman shielded from harm, felt like a small repayment to my mother, a restoration of the world she had been denied. Years passed. Lila grew into a strong, compassionate young woman, her own experiences shaping her into an advocate for the vulnerable. Gabriel and I celebrated our victories quietly, content with lives of meaningful impact. The scars of my past remained, yes, but they no longer defined me. They guided me, shaped my empathy, strengthened my resolve. Now, on the porch of my Pacific Haven home, the sea breeze brushing my face, I see the path I carved from suffering to purpose. Life had taught me that strength is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the courage to rebuild, to nurture, to love. I had risen above the shadows of Harrington, not merely surviving, but flourishing. And as the sun dips below the horizon, I whisper a quiet truth I have learned through decades of struggle. The past may shape us, but it does not determine the life we choose. Every stitch of every quilt, every life touched, every bond nurtured. It is proof that even broken threads can be woven into a tapestry of hope. The mornings in Pacific Haven had a rhythm I had grown to love. The smell of sea air mixed with the scent of fresh coffee, the gulls calling overhead, and the quiet hum of life beyond the waves. My grandchildren, Ethan, now 30, and Claire, 27, would come by nearly every weekend. Their laughter filled the house, a sound more precious than any victory I had ever claimed in Harrington. Ethan had inherited his grandfather Gabriel's patience and meticulous nature. He was a history teacher now, passionate and kind, teaching his students not just facts, but the lessons of empathy and courage. Claire, ever curious and adventurous, pursued oceanography, driven by the same love for the sea that had healed me. Watching them, I saw the future reflected back at me, strong, compassionate, resilient. I took every opportunity to teach them the values I had fought to reclaim: strength, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Our afternoons were often spent in quiet conversation on the porch or in the garden, where I would tell stories from my youth. Stories of pain, yes, but also of triumph, of justice, and of the quiet, steady work it takes to transform a broken past into a meaningful life. The quilts I made had become more than gifts. They were symbols of healing. Each pattern, each color, a story of resilience. I continued to sew, often with the grandchildren beside me, teaching them not just the craft, but the meaning behind it. That even the smallest, discarded pieces could become something beautiful and enduring. Sometimes, Ethan would help select fabrics for a quilt meant for a child recovering from abuse. Claire would organize scraps by color and pattern, helping me imagine designs that told stories of hope. Together, we created more than quilts. We created legacies. Each piece was a testament to the idea that even broken fragments can be transformed into something that nurtures, comforts, and inspires. As the years passed, our family became a web of support and love. Leila, now a strong advocate for traumatized children, would visit with her husband Henry, and our home echoed with the energy of their children, the next generation carrying forward lessons of empathy, courage, and care. I often reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From Harrington, from the shadows of abuse, from the schemes of the brotherhood, to this life of quiet fulfillment. The struggles of my past had shaped me, but they no longer dictated my present. Instead, they had instilled in me a fierce dedication to protect the vulnerable, to teach the young, and to ensure that the scars we carry could become instruments of wisdom and compassion. Sitting on the porch in the late afternoon, watching the waves kiss the shore, I realized that my greatest victories were not in the downfall of those who had harmed us, but in the life I had built, the family I had nurtured, and the values I could pass on. And as Ethan and Claire ran along the beach, their laughter mingling with the song of the sea, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past had not defeated me. It had guided me to this moment, a life of love, purpose, and legacy. Through family, through the quilts, and through the lessons passed from one generation to the next, the story of survival had transformed into a story of hope. At 78, I sit on the porch of my home in Pacific Haven, gazing at the endless blue of the ocean. The waves roll in rhythmically, constant and unyielding, much like the years that shaped me. In the distance, gulls circle above the cliffs, free and untethered. And for the first time in my life, I feel a sense of quiet that I never imagined possible. The memories of Harrington, the shadows of my childhood, the battles with the brotherhood, they are never far. Some nights a smell, a sound, or a fragment of a dream can transport me back to those moments of fear and pain. But now, instead of paralyzing me, they serve as reminders of how far I have come. Each scar, visible or hidden, is a testament to survival. Each choice I made to rise again strengthened the woman I am today. I think of the journey that brought me here, the mentors who guided me, the father who rebuilt himself, the love I found in Gabriel, and the family I created with Lila. I think of the lives I touched through law, through quilts, through acts of compassion. Pain, I have learned, is never meaningless when it is transformed into purpose. Helping others became my mission. Every child rescued, every woman protected, every quilt stitched for a broken heart was my way of turning suffering into strength. True justice is not always about revenge. It is about giving light to the shadows, creating safety where there was fear, and teaching resilience to those who might otherwise be silenced. To those watching this story, know this: you are not alone. If you are enduring abuse, neglect, or injustice, there is a path forward. Seek help. Reach for those who can guide you. And if you can, be the light for someone else. A simple act of belief, a listening ear, or a helping hand can alter a life profoundly. Strength does not come from avoiding pain. It comes from surviving it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward despite it. Even small steps count. Each day you rise, you rebuild, you resist. That resistance, that determination, is more powerful than any harm that was ever done to you. As I watch the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with gold and crimson, I am reminded that endings can be beautiful, even when they are hard-earned. Life, with all its trials, has a way of gifting meaning to those who refuse to let suffering define them. The past may shape us, but it does not determine our future, and so I continue to live, to love, to share, to guide. Each quilt I make, each story I tell, each hand I hold is my voice saying, there is hope, there is healing, and there is strength in you that you may not yet know. If my journey resonates with you, I urge you to take action today. Subscribe to this channel and join a community that believes in survival, transformation, and empowerment. Share this story with someone who may need to hear it. Your small gesture could become a lifeline. Remember, our scars tell a story, but we are the authors of the chapters that follow. Choose to write yours with courage, with purpose, and with love. I chose mine, and I choose it every single day.